The scar that ran from Flora Thompson's left temple down to her jawline had long since healed. But the words her former fiancé had spoken before walking out of her life still cut deeper than any knife ever could. She stood on the dusty platform of the Bentonville, Arkansas railway station in the sweltering heat of July 1882, clutching a single worn carpet bag that contained everything she owned, trying to convince herself that starting over in this unfamiliar town was the right decision. Her aunt's letter had been brief but kind, offering Flora a place to stay and work at her boarding house after hearing about the accident that had changed everything. The stagecoach accident 6 months ago had taken 3 lives and left Flora with more than just physical scars. It had stripped away her future, her confidence, and according to everyone back in St. Louis, her chances of ever finding love again. Her fiancé Thomas had taken one look at her face when the bandages came off and told her he could not marry a woman who looked like that. Her mother had cried and said she understood why he left. Her sisters had whispered that perhaps Flora should focus on becoming a spinster aunt to their children rather than hoping for her own family. Even the doctor had patted her hand sympathetically and said she should be grateful to be alive, as if that was supposed to be enough. The sun beat down mercilessly as Flora walked the dirt streets of Bentonville, following the directions her aunt had written. The town was smaller than she had expected, with a main street lined with wooden storefronts and several side streets that led to residential areas and ranches beyond. Men on horseback rode past, tipping their hats politely, though Flora noticed how their eyes would catch on her scar and quickly look away. She had grown accustomed to that reaction. Her aunt's boarding house stood at the corner of Main Street and Oak, a 2-story white building with a wraparound porch that desperately needed a fresh coat of paint. Flora knocked on the door and waited, her heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and exhaustion from the long journey. The woman who opened the door was in her 50s, with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical bun, and warm hazel eyes that reminded Flora of her late father. Aunt Margaret pulled her into an embrace without hesitation, and Flora felt something inside her chest crack open just slightly. Come in, dear girl," Margaret said, taking Flora's bag. "You must be exhausted. I have a room ready for you, and there is cold lemonade in the kitchen." The boarding house was clean and welcoming, with worn but comfortable furniture, and the smell of fresh bread wafting from somewhere deeper inside. Margaret led Flora upstairs to a small room with a window overlooking the street, and for the first time in months, Flora felt like she might be able to breathe again. Over lemonade at the kitchen table, Margaret explained the situation. She ran the boarding house alone since her husband had passed 2 years prior, and she needed help with the cooking, cleaning, and managing the guests. Most of her boarders were ranch hands, cowboys passing through, and the occasional traveling salesman. The work would be hard, but Flora would have room and board plus a small wage. "I won't lie to you, Flora," Margaret said, her eyes gentle but honest. "Some folks in town will stare, some will whisper, but you hold your head high, you hear me? That scar does not define you, and anyone who thinks it does is not worth your time." Flora wanted to believe her, but the voices from St. Louis still echoed in her mind. She was damaged goods now. No man would want her. She should be grateful for any kindness shown to her and not expect more. The next morning, Flora began her new life. She woke before dawn to help Margaret prepare breakfast for the boarders, learning quickly that ranch hands ate enormous amounts of food and expected it hot and plentiful. There were currently 5 men staying at the house, most of them working at the various cattle ranches that surrounded Bentonville. They were polite enough, thanking her for the food and keeping their eyes on their plates, but Flora could feel their discomfort with her presence. On her third day in Bentonville, everything changed. Flora was at the general store picking up supplies for Margaret when she heard shouting from outside. She stepped onto the wooden sidewalk to see a horse rearing up in the middle of the street, a young boy frozen in fear directly in its path. Without thinking, Flora dropped her basket and ran, grabbing the boy and pulling him out of the way just as the horse's hooves came crashing down where he had been standing. She fell hard onto the dirt, the boy safely tucked against her, her heart racing as she realized how close they had both come to serious injury. Strong hands lifted her to her feet a moment later, and she found herself looking up into the most striking blue eyes she had ever seen. "That was the bravest damn thing I have seen in a long time," the man said, his voice low and rough like gravel and honey mixed together. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with sun-bronzed skin and dark brown hair that fell just past his collar. He wore the typical attire of a working cowboy: dusty boots, worn denim pants, a light blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up revealing strong forearms, and a hat that he had apparently lost in his rush to help her up. His face was all hard angles and sharp planes, handsome in a rugged, lived-in way that made Flora's breath catch for reasons that had nothing to do with her recent exertion. "The boy," Flora said, looking around for the child she had pulled to safety. "His mama has got him," the cowboy said, nodding toward a woman who was crying and hugging the boy tightly while thanking God repeatedly. "Are you hurt?" "No, I am fine," Flora said, becoming suddenly aware that his hands were still on her arms, steadying her. She stepped back, turning her head instinctively so her scarred side was less visible. It was a habit she had developed, trying to hide what could not be hidden. The cowboy bent down to pick up his hat, then started gathering the scattered supplies from her dropped basket. "Let me help you with this. That was my horse that spooked, so it is the least I can do." "Your horse?" Flora looked at the animal, now calm and being held by another man. "Yes, madam. Something must have startled him. He is usually steady as a rock." The cowboy straightened up, the basket now full again, and held it out to her. His eyes met hers directly, and Flora realized with a start that he was looking at her full on, scar visible, and his expression had not changed at all. No flinch, no quick glance away, just steady eye contact that made her feel seen in a way she had not felt since before the accident. "Thank you," she managed, taking the basket. "I am Asher Garrett," he said. "I work at the Running Creek Ranch about 5 miles north of town, and you are?" "Flora Thompson. I just moved here to help my aunt run her boarding house." "Well, Miss Thompson, it is a pleasure to meet you, even under such exciting circumstances." The corner of his mouth quirked up in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "I hope I will see you around town." Before Flora could respond, the boy's mother rushed over to thank her profusely. And in the commotion, Asher Garrett tipped his hat and walked back to his horse. Flora watched him mount up with easy grace, and just before he rode away, he looked back at her once more, that same steady gaze that made her feel warm all over. That evening, as Flora helped Margaret prepare dinner, she found herself thinking about the cowboy with the blue eyes. It was foolish, she told herself. One kind interaction did not mean anything. But she could not shake the memory of how he had looked at her without flinching, without pity, without that awful combination of discomfort and forced politeness that everyone else seemed to offer. "You are smiling," Margaret observed, stirring a pot of stew. "Something good happened today." Flora told her about the incident with the horse and the boy, though she left out most of the details about Asher Garrett. Margaret listened with interest, then said, "That must have been one of the Garrett boys. Good family." The father died about 5 years back, and the oldest son, Asher, took over running their ranch. From what I hear, he has done a fine job of it too. Works harder than 3 men combined. Flora filed this information away, telling herself it did not matter, that she was not interested, that she had come to Bentonville to work and build a quiet life, not to entertain impossible fantasies about handsome cowboys. But 3 days later, Asher Garrett walked into the boarding house dining room. Flora was setting the table for dinner, and she nearly dropped the stack of plates she was carrying when she saw him standing in the doorway, hat in hand, looking somehow even taller and broader than she remembered. "Mr. Garrett," Margaret said warmly, coming out of the kitchen. "What a nice surprise. Are you looking for a room? Actually, Mrs. Davis, I was wondering if you might have space for my younger brother. He is starting work at the mill next week, and it would be easier for him to stay in town rather than make the ride back and forth each day. Of course, I have a room available. When would he like to start?" As Margaret and Asher discussed the details, Flora tried to focus on her task, but she was acutely aware of his presence. When Margaret invited him to stay for dinner as they finalized the arrangements, Flora's hands trembled slightly as she added another place setting to the table. Dinner was a lively affair, with the ranch hands sharing stories and jokes while Margaret kept everyone's plates full. Asher sat at the end of the table, participating in the conversation but also seeming content to listen and observe. Flora tried not to look at him too often, but every time she brought more food from the kitchen or refilled the water pitcher, she felt his eyes on her. After the meal, as the men retired to the porch for their evening smokes and Flora began clearing the table, Asher appeared at her elbow with a stack of dirty plates. "You do not have to do that," Flora said, surprised. "I know, but my mama raised me to be useful." He carried the plates to the kitchen, and Flora followed with her own load. When she reached for his stack to wash them, their hands brushed, and Flora felt that same jolt of warmth she had experienced when he had helped her up in the street. "That was a brave thing you did the other day," Asher said, leaning against the counter as Flora began washing dishes. "Saved that boy's life. Anyone would have done the same." "No, they would not have. Most people freeze when they see danger. You ran toward it." Flora did not know what to say to that. She focused on scrubbing a plate, very aware that they were alone in the kitchen, that Margaret had gone upstairs to check on something, that Asher was standing close enough that she could smell the scent of leather and sage and something else that was just him. "How are you settling into Bentonville?" he asked. "Well enough. My aunt has been very kind." "That is good. And the town, are people treating you right?" It was an odd question, Flora thought, washing another plate. Why would they not? "No reason," Asher said, but his tone suggested he knew exactly why they might not. "I just know that small towns can be tough on newcomers sometimes. People can be quick to judge on appearances rather than character." Flora's hand stilled in the soapy water. Was he talking about her scar? Did he think she was so fragile that she could not handle a few stares? "I can take care of myself, Mr. Garrett." "I am sure you can. I just wanted you to know that if anyone gives you trouble, you have friends here. People who see you for who you really are." Flora turned to look at him then, really look at him, and found those blue eyes watching her with an intensity that made her knees weak. "And who am I really, according to you? Someone brave. Someone kind. Someone who runs toward danger to save a child without thinking about the risk to herself." He straightened up, and Flora could tell he was about to leave. "That is the kind of person I would want on my side, Miss Thompson." He left the kitchen, and Flora stood there with her hands in the dishwater, her heart beating so hard she thought it might crack through her ribs. Over the next few weeks, Flora saw Asher regularly. His brother Ethan moved into the boarding house, a friendly young man of 19 with the same dark hair and blue eyes as his older brother, though without the same serious intensity. Ethan was cheerful and chatty, often helping Flora with chores and telling her stories about growing up on the ranch. Through him, Flora learned more about Asher, how he had been only 23 when their father died and he had to take on the responsibility of the ranch and raising his 3 younger siblings. How he worked from dawn until long after dusk, never complaining, never taking shortcuts. How he was respected throughout the county for his integrity and his skill with horses. But more than hearing about Asher, Flora saw him. He came to town at least twice a week, always finding a reason to stop by the boarding house. Sometimes he brought vegetables from the ranch garden for Margaret. Sometimes he came to check on Ethan. Sometimes he just appeared at dinner time and Margaret would insist he stay and eat with them, and every single time, Asher found a way to talk to Flora. It started small. Comments about the weather, questions about how she was settling in, compliments on the food. But gradually, the conversations deepened. Asher would linger after dinner, helping her clean up, and they would talk about everything and nothing. Flora learned that he loved horses more than cattle, that he read books whenever he had a spare moment, which was rare, that he had always wanted to see the ocean but probably never would. He learned that Flora had wanted to be a teacher before the accident, that she missed her father terribly, that she was afraid she would never feel truly at home anywhere again. He never mentioned her scar, not once. He looked at her face when they talked, maintaining eye contact in a way that felt almost defiant, as if daring her to believe that it mattered to him. And slowly, so slowly she almost did not notice it happening, Flora began to relax around him. She stopped angling her face away. She stopped bracing herself for that flicker of revulsion that had become so familiar. With Asher, she just felt like Flora, not Flora with the scar, not Flora the damaged one, just Flora. But she did not let herself hope. She could not. The voices from St. Louis were too strong, too insistent. No man would want her. She was ruined. Any kindness Asher showed was just politeness, just his good nature, nothing more. Then came the dance. Bentonville was celebrating the opening of a new church with a town social and dance in early September. Margaret was excited, insisting that Flora needed a new dress for the occasion. Flora protested, saying she did not plan to attend, but Margaret would not hear of it. "You have been working yourself to the bone for 2 months, girl. You deserve a night of fun." "I do not dance anymore," Flora said quietly. "Then you will sit and socialize and eat good food. But you are going." On the night of the social, Flora put on the new dress Margaret had helped her sew, a deep green cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. She had pulled her blonde hair back on one side, partially covering the scar, and when she looked in the mirror, she saw a glimmer of the woman she used to be before everything fell apart. The churchyard was strung with lanterns, and tables groaned under the weight of food brought by every family in the area. A group of musicians played fiddles and guitars while couples danced in the open space that had been designated as the dance floor. Flora stood at the edge of the gathering, watching but not participating, telling herself she was content to observe. "You look beautiful." Flora turned to find Asher standing beside her. He was cleaned up, wearing dark trousers and a white shirt that emphasized his broad shoulders, his hair still damp like he had just bathed. Her mouth went dry. "Thank you," she managed. "You clean up well yourself. May I get you some punch?" They walked to the refreshment table together, and Flora was acutely aware of the looks they were getting from other townspeople. Some were curious, some were judgmental, and some were outright shocked that someone like Asher Garrett was paying attention to someone like her. Flora felt her old insecurities rising up, whispering that she did not belong here, that she should leave before she embarrassed herself or worse, embarrassed Asher. "What are you thinking about?" Asher asked, handing her a cup of punch. "Nothing important." "You are a terrible liar, Flora Thompson." He had started using her first name a few weeks ago, and every time he said it, she felt a little thrill run through her. "I was thinking that people are staring. Let them stare. Does it not bother you? Why would it?" Asher looked genuinely confused. Flora gestured vaguely at her face, at the scar that she knew was visible even in the dim lantern light. "People are wondering why you are spending time with me." Asher set down his cup of punch with enough force that some sloshed over the side. "Excuse me for a moment." Before Flora could stop him, he had stepped up onto the church steps where everyone could see him and called out in a voice loud enough to carry across the entire gathering. "Can I have everyone's attention, please?" The music stuttered to a stop. Conversations died. Every face turned toward Asher. "I just want to make something clear," Asher said, his voice steady and strong. "I am spending time with Miss Flora Thompson because she is smart, kind, brave, and the most interesting person I have met in years. Anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to discuss it with me personally. And if I hear that anyone has said anything unkind to her or about her, we will have more than just a discussion. Are we clear?" The silence that followed was deafening. Flora felt her face burning, torn between mortification and something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. Asher stepped down from the church steps and walked back to her, offering his hand. "Would you like to dance? I told you I do not dance anymore." "Why not?" "Because no one wants to dance with someone who looks like me." "I want to dance with you," Asher said simply. "In fact, there is no one else here I would rather dance with." Flora looked at his hand, extended toward her, steady and sure. She looked at his face, at those blue eyes that saw her, really saw her, and had from the very beginning. And she realized that the voices from St. Louis, all those people who had told her she would never be loved again, they were wrong. They had to be wrong because the way Asher was looking at her right now, that was not pity, that was not kindness, that was something else entirely. She took his hand. The musicians started up again, a slower song this time, and Asher led Flora onto the dance floor. He held her properly, one hand at her waist, the other holding her hand, and he guided her through the steps with an easy confidence that made it simple to follow. Other couples joined them, and soon the floor was full of swirling skirts and stomping boots, but Flora was only aware of Asher, of the warmth of his hand on her waist, of the way he was looking at her like she was the only person in the world. "Why are you doing this?" Flora asked as they turned together. "Dancing with you, all of it. The dinners, the conversations, this. Why?" Asher was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was low and intense. "From the moment I saw you run into danger to save that boy, I knew you were special. And every time I have talked to you since, every time I have seen you smile or heard you laugh or watched you work tirelessly to take care of others, I have become more certain. You are everything I did not know I was looking for, Flora Thompson. But my face, your face is beautiful, all of it. Every part of it, including that scar that you think defines you but actually just shows how strong you are, how you survived something terrible and kept going." Flora felt tears prickling at her eyes. "They told me no man would ever want me again. Then they were fools," Asher said fiercely. "And they did not know what they were talking about." The song ended, but Asher did not let go of her hand. He led her away from the crowd, to a quieter area near the edge of the church yard where they could talk without being overheard. "I know this is fast," Asher said, still holding her hand. "I know you probably think I am crazy, but I have spent the last 2 months trying to find excuses to see you, lying awake at night thinking about you, and I cannot do it anymore. I need you to know how I feel. I am falling in love with you, Flora. Actually, I think I fell in love with you in that street when you ran toward danger without hesitation, and I have been falling harder every day since." Flora could not breathe, could not think, could not process what he was saying because it was impossible, because men like Asher Garrett did not fall in love with damaged women like her, because this was a dream and she was going to wake up any moment. "Say something," Asher said, and for the first time since she had met him he looked uncertain. "I am afraid," Flora whispered. "Of what?" "That this is not real, that you will change your mind, that you will wake up one day and realize you made a mistake." Asher cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently tracing her cheekbones, including the scarred one. "I will spend every day for the rest of my life proving to you that this is real, that I will never change my mind, that loving you is not a mistake. I will tell you every morning that you are beautiful. I will show you every day that you are worthy of love. I will make sure you never doubt again that you are the most precious thing in my world, if you will let me." "Asher," Flora said, and then she was crying, but they were good tears, happy tears, tears of relief and joy and something that felt like coming home after being lost for a very long time. "I think I am falling in love with you too." He kissed her then, soft and gentle and full of promise, and Flora felt all the broken pieces inside her start to knit back together. When they finally pulled apart, Asher was grinning and Flora realized she was grinning too, wider than she had in months, so wide it hurt her scarred skin, but she did not care. "So we are doing this?" she asked. "If you want to." "I want to," Flora said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. They walked back to the dance hand in hand, and if people stared, Flora did not notice. She was too busy listening to Asher tell her about his ranch, about his plans for the future, about how he hoped she might want to be part of that future. She was too busy falling in love, real and true and deep, the kind of love she had thought was lost to her forever. The courtship that followed was everything Flora had dreamed of, and nothing she had expected. Asher was not a man of flowery words or grand romantic gestures, but he showed his love in 1,000 small ways. He brought her wild flowers he picked on his rides. He fixed the loose board on the boarding house porch without being asked. He taught her to ride a horse so she could come visit the ranch, patiently guiding her through her fear until she felt confident in the saddle. He introduced her to his siblings, his mother having passed when the youngest was born, and they welcomed her with open arms, delighted that their serious older brother had found someone who made him smile. But more than anything, Asher kept his promise. Every single day he told Flora she was beautiful. Every single day he found ways to show her that her scar did not matter to him, that he loved all of her, every part, every piece, every imperfection. When she had bad days, when the old doubts crept in, and she heard the voices from St. Louis telling her she was not enough, Asher was there, steady and sure, reminding her of the truth. Flora blossomed under his love. She laughed more, smiled more, felt more like herself than she had since before the accident. Margaret noticed the change, commenting that Flora seemed lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. The boarding house guests noticed too, and even the ones who had initially been uncomfortable with her scar grew to appreciate her warmth and kindness. In November, Asher took Flora out to the ranch on a crisp autumn day when the leaves were turning gold and red. They rode out to a spot overlooking a creek, where the water burbled over smooth stones and cottonwood trees provided shade. It was beautiful and peaceful, and Flora understood immediately why Asher had brought her here. "This is my favorite place on the ranch," he said, helping her down from her horse. I come here when I need to think or when I need peace. It is beautiful, Flora said, taking in the view. I want to build a house here, Asher said. Right on that ridge where you can see the creek and the sunrise. I have been planning it in my head for years, thinking about what it would look like, how many rooms it would need. It sounds wonderful. I always pictured sharing it with someone, Asher continued, and his voice had taken on that serious tone that Flora had come to recognize meant he had something important to say. Someone who would love this place as much as I do. Someone who would help me turn a house into a home. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Flora Thompson, I know we have only known each other for 4 months. I know some people will say we are rushing, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I want to marry you, build that house with you, raise a family with you, grow old with you. I want to spend every day proving to you that you are loved, that you are cherished, that you are my whole world. Will you marry me? Flora felt the tears coming again, but this time she did not try to stop them. Yes, she said, her voice choked with emotion. Yes, I will marry you. Asher pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and Flora clung to him. This man who had seen her at her lowest and chosen to love her anyway. This man who had taken all the broken pieces of her heart and helped her put them back together. They were married in December in the new church, with Margaret crying happy tears in the front row and Ethan standing up as Asher's best man. Flora wore a simple white dress with long sleeves and a high neck, her hair arranged to cover the scar slightly, though she found she cared less about hiding it than she used to. Asher wore his best suit, and when Flora walked down the aisle toward him, the look on his face told her everything she needed to know about how he saw her. The wedding was small but joyful, with the whole town invited to celebrate afterward. People who had initially been skeptical of the match seemed to have come around, seeing how happy Asher and Flora were together, how well they fit. And if there were still some who whispered or judged, Flora found she could not bring herself to care. She had Asher, and he had her, and that was all that mattered. They spent their wedding night at the ranch house where Asher lived with his siblings, though plans were already underway to begin building the new house by the creek in spring. Flora had expected to be nervous, but with Asher, everything felt natural and right. He was gentle and patient, making sure she felt loved and cherished every moment, and when they finally came together as husband and wife, Flora felt like she had finally found the place where she belonged. The winter months were challenging but happy. Flora moved to the ranch, learning the rhythms of ranch life and discovering that she loved it more than she had expected. She learned to cook for a large household, to manage supplies and plan ahead for harsh weather, to help with the endless tasks that came with running a cattle ranch. Asher's siblings, 2 brothers and a sister, accepted her as part of the family immediately, and Flora found herself becoming a mother figure to the youngest, a girl named Sarah who was only 11 and had barely any memories of her own mother. Through it all, Asher kept his promise. Every morning when they woke up, he told her she was beautiful. Every day, he found ways to show her that he loved her, whether it was through a touch as they passed in the hallway, a stolen kiss in the barn, or the way he looked at her across the dinner table like she hung the moon. When Flora had doubts, which still happened sometimes, Asher was there to talk her through them, to remind her of her worth, to prove to her again and again that she was loved. In March, just as they were preparing to break ground on the new house, Flora discovered she was pregnant. She had not been sure how she felt about having children, afraid that they might inherit her bad luck or that she might not be a good mother. But Asher's joy was so genuine and so complete that she could not help but share it. "We are having a baby," he kept saying over and over like he could not quite believe it. "We are having a baby." "Are you happy?" Flora asked, though his grin made the answer obvious. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Asher said, pulling her into his arms. "You have given me everything, Flora. A love I never thought I would find, a partner I can count on, and now a child. You have made my life complete." The pregnancy was not easy. Flora suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and the Arkansas summer heat made her miserable as her belly grew. But Asher was attentive and caring, making sure she rested, bringing her cold water when she overheated, rubbing her aching back at night. He read to her from the newspaper and from books, keeping her entertained during the long afternoons when she was too tired to do much. The new house was completed in September, just a month before the baby was due. It was everything Flora could have dreamed of and more: a spacious two-story home with a wide front porch, large windows that let in plenty of light, and a kitchen that was the envy of every ranch wife in the county. Asher had built it with his own hands, with help from his brothers and some hired men, and every board and nail represented his love and his commitment to their future. They moved in on a sunny September day, and that night, as they lay in their new bedroom listening to the creek babble outside the window, Flora felt a contentment so deep it almost frightened her. "What are you thinking about?" Asher asked, running his fingers through her hair, something he knew she loved. "I am thinking about how different my life is from what I expected," Flora said. "A year ago, I was arriving in Bentonville thinking my life was essentially over. I thought I would never be loved, never have a family, never be happy again. And now look at me. Married to the most wonderful man in the world, living in a beautiful house, about to have a baby. It is almost too much happiness." "You deserve every bit of it," Asher said firmly, "and more." "How did I get so lucky?" Flora asked, turning to look at him in the moonlight filtering through the window. "I am the lucky one," Asher said, leaning down to kiss her forehead, her nose, her lips, and finally, deliberately, the scarred side of her face. "I found the love of my life, and I get to spend every day showing her how much she means to me." Their son was born on a cold October morning in 1883, after a long and difficult labor that had Asher pacing the floor downstairs, while Margaret and the midwife attended to Flora. When it was finally over, when Flora held the tiny, perfect baby in her arms and saw Asher's face as he looked at his son for the first time, she understood what true joy meant. They named him James, after Asher's father, and he was a beautiful baby with dark hair and blue eyes that Flora hoped would stay that color. Asher was a devoted father from the start, helping with diaper changes and nighttime feedings, rocking the baby when he cried, singing nonsense songs that made Flora laugh and seemed to soothe James immediately. Watching Asher with their son made Flora fall even more deeply in love with him. She had not thought it was possible to love him more than she already did, but seeing his gentleness with the baby, his patience and care, opened up new depths of feeling. As James grew from an infant to a toddler, the ranch prospered under Asher's management. He had a reputation throughout Arkansas as an honest dealer and a skilled rancher, and their herd grew steadily. They hired more hands, built more outbuildings, and began to establish themselves as one of the most successful operations in the area. But despite their success, Asher never lost sight of what was most important. Every morning, without fail, he told Flora she was beautiful. Every day, he found ways to show her that she was loved and valued. When other ranchers' wives would visit and occasionally make thoughtless comments about Flora's scar, Asher would gently but firmly shut them down, making it clear that he would not tolerate anyone disrespecting his wife. Flora had long since stopped worrying about the scar as much as she used to. It was part of her, yes, but it no longer defined her. She was Asher's wife, James's mother, a ranch owner, a friend, a daughter, a woman with value and purpose beyond her appearance. The voices from St. Louis had faded to nothing, drowned out by Asher's daily affirmations and the evidence of her own life. In 1885, Flora gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose. She had Flora's blonde hair and a disposition so sunny it seemed impossible she ever cried, though of course she did. James, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to hold her and help take care of her. Life settled into a rhythm of work and love and family. Asher's siblings had all moved out to start their own lives. Ethan had married and taken over a section of the ranch to manage himself. So the house by the creek was filled only with Asher, Flora, and their growing children. They added on to the house, building more bedrooms and expanding the kitchen, making room for the family they hoped to continue growing. In 1887, Flora gave birth to twin boys, a surprise that had both her and Asher laughing in shock when the midwife announced there was another baby coming. They named them Samuel and Thomas, and suddenly the house was full of noise and chaos and more love than Flora had ever imagined possible. The years passed in a blur of children growing, cattle drives, harsh winters and hot summers, challenges overcome and victories celebrated. Flora learned to be a ranch wife in every sense of the word, capable of handling any crisis that arose when Asher was out working. She kept the books, managed the household, raised the children, and somehow still found time to help Margaret at the boarding house when she was needed. But through all of it, through the busy days and exhausted nights, through the struggles and the triumphs, Asher never wavered in his devotion. He told her she was beautiful every single morning. He showed her she was loved every single day. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1892, Flora looked at her husband across the dinner table, surrounded by their 4 children ranging from James, who was now 9, to the twins who were 5, and she marveled at the life they had built together. That night, after the children were in bed, Asher and Flora sat on their front porch watching the sun set over the ranch. It was their favorite time of day, these quiet moments when they could just be together without the demands of work or children pulling them in different directions. "Do you remember what you said to me the night before we got married?" Asher asked, his arm around Flora's shoulders, her head resting on his chest. "I said a lot of things that night," Flora said with a smile. "You told me you were afraid that this was not real, that I would change my mind, that I would wake up one day and realize I had made a mistake. I remember. Have I proven to you yet that you were wrong?" Asher asked, and there was something almost vulnerable in his voice, like after 10 years of marriage he still worried that she might doubt his love. Flora tilted her head up to look at him, this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved, who had taken a broken woman and loved her back to wholeness. "You have proven it to me every single day," she said. "From the moment you did not flinch when you looked at my face in that street, through every dinner conversation and every flower you picked for me, and every time you held me when I cried. You have shown me what real love looks like, Asher. Not love based on appearance or circumstance, but love based on who we are at our core. You saw me when everyone else only saw my scar, and you loved me not in spite of it, but just loved me, all of me, exactly as I am." "You are so easy to love," Asher said, cupping her face the way he had that night at the dance when he first told her how he felt. "You are brave and strong and kind and smart, and yes, you are beautiful. So beautiful it takes my breath away sometimes. Even with this." Flora asked, running her finger along the scar that had faded over the years but would never completely disappear. "Especially with that," Asher said. "Because that scar means you survived. It means you are strong enough to overcome anything. It means you are here with me, and that makes it the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." Flora kissed him then, deep and long and full of all the love and gratitude and joy that filled her heart. When they finally pulled apart, both smiling, Flora said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For proving them wrong. All those people who told me I would never be loved again, that no man would want me, that I should be grateful just to be alive and not expect more. You proved every single one of them wrong." "They were always wrong," Asher said. "You were always worthy of love. I just feel privileged that I was the one who got to give it to you." As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, Flora thought about the journey that had brought her here. The accident that had scarred her, the people who had abandoned her, the loneliness and fear and despair she had felt. And then Bentonville, Margaret's kindness, a spooked horse and a brave moment and blue eyes that saw her truly. She thought about all the days since then, all the mornings Asher had told her she was beautiful, all the ways he had shown her she was loved, all the moments big and small that had built their life together. She thought about their children asleep inside, the ranch they had built together, the future that stretched out before them full of promise. And she thought about how wrong everyone had been, all those people who had told her she would never be loved again. Because she was loved, deeply and completely and truly, by a man who proved it to her every single day. The children grew and the years continued their steady march forward. James became a skilled horseman like his father, often riding out with Asher to check on the herd or mend fences. Rose was artistic, filling the house with drawings and showing a talent for needlework that delighted Margaret whenever they visited town. The twins were wild and energetic, getting into mischief, but always looking out for each other in that way twins do. In 1894, Flora gave birth to their fifth and final child, another daughter they named Grace. She was a calm baby, content to watch the world with serious dark eyes, and she completed their family in a way that felt perfectly right. As the children grew older and more independent, Flora found herself with more time to pursue her old dream of teaching. She started by tutoring her own children, then expanded to include the children of ranch hands and neighboring families. Asher helped her convert one of the ranch outbuildings into a small schoolhouse, and before long, Flora was teaching a dozen children from the surrounding area. It was fulfilling work, and Flora discovered that she had a gift for it. She was patient and creative, finding ways to make lessons interesting and engaging. The children loved her, and their parents were grateful for the opportunity to have their children educated without having to send them into town. Asher was proud of what Flora had accomplished, often telling anyone who would listen about his brilliant wife, who was teaching the next generation. He supported her fully, taking on more of the household management so she could focus on her students, and never once suggesting that teaching was taking her away from her duties as a ranch wife and mother. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1902, Asher took Flora back to the spot by the creek where he had proposed. It was summer, and the cottonwood trees were full and green, providing cool shade. They sat on a blanket, alone for the first time in what felt like years, with James watching the younger children back at the house. 20 years, Flora said wonderingly. How is that possible? It has gone by in a blink, Asher agreed, and yet it feels like I have known you forever. They were both older now. Asher's dark hair was threaded with gray, and lines had appeared around his eyes from years of squinting in the sun. Flora had a few gray hairs of her own, and her body bore the evidence of 5 pregnancies and years of hard work. But when they looked at each other, Flora knew they still saw the same people they had been when they first fell in love. "I have something for you," Asher said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small leather journal, worn and creased from obvious use. "I have been keeping this since the day we met." Flora opened the journal carefully and found page after page of Asher's handwriting. Each entry was dated, and each one was a note about her. Something she had said, something she had done, a moment they had shared. There were entries about their wedding day, about the births of each of their children, about quiet moments and big milestones. But there were also entries about ordinary days, about the way Flora hummed while she cooked, about how she laughed at James's jokes, about the concentrated expression she got when she was teaching. "You wrote about me every day?" Flora asked, tears streaming down her face as she flipped through the pages. "Not every day," Asher admitted. "I missed some when I was on cattle drives or when we were too busy. But most days, yes, I wanted to remember everything. I wanted to have a record of our life together, of all the reasons I love you." Flora threw her arms around him, holding him tight, this man who had loved her so faithfully and so well for 20 years. "I love you," she said fiercely. "I love you so much, Asher Garrett." "I love you too, Flora Garrett. And I will love you for 20 more years and 20 after that, and as many 20s as we are given." They sat there for a long time, holding each other, watching the creek flow past just as it had on the day Asher proposed. Flora thought about how much had changed since then and how much had stayed the same. They had built a life together, raised a family, created something lasting and good, and through all of it, Asher had kept his promise. He had proven to her every single day that she was loved, that she was valued, that she was more than the scar on her face. The children began leaving home as they grew into adults. James took over management of a large section of the ranch, marrying a sweet girl from town and eventually giving Flora and Asher their first grandchild. Rose married a teacher from Fort Smith and moved there, though she visited often. The twins went into business together, opening a successful general store in Bentonville. And Grace, their youngest, surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to go to college, something almost unheard of for a woman at the time. Asher supported Grace's ambition without hesitation, using some of their savings to send her to a women's college in Missouri. When some of the neighboring ranchers questioned whether it was appropriate to educate a daughter so extensively, Asher shut them down quickly, saying his daughter could be anything she wanted to be, and he would support her completely. "You are just like your mother," Asher told Grace as he helped her prepare to leave. "Smart and brave and determined. You are going to do amazing things." Flora watched this exchange with pride and love, seeing how Asher's devotion to her had extended to their daughter, how he had learned from loving Flora that a woman's worth was not determined by her appearance or by society's limited expectations. He had raised their daughter to believe she could achieve anything, just as he had helped Flora believe the same thing about herself. As they entered their 50s and then their 60s, Asher and Flora settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch was prosperous and well managed, largely by James and Ethan now, though Asher still rode out most days to check on things. Flora continued teaching, though she had cut back her hours, preferring to spend more time with the growing number of grandchildren who came to visit. They were well respected in the community, seen as pillars of Bentonville society. Flora had long since stopped worrying about her scar, which had faded to a thin white line that was barely noticeable. But even if it had remained prominent, Flora knew it would not have mattered. She had learned through Asher's love that her worth was not tied to her appearance, that she was valuable and lovable exactly as she was. On the morning of their 40th wedding anniversary in 1922, Flora woke to find Asher already awake, propped up on one elbow looking at her. His hair was completely white now, and his face was deeply lined, but his blue eyes were just as bright and clear as they had been when they first met. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, as he had said every morning for 40 years. "Good morning," Flora replied, reaching up to touch his face. "What are you thinking about?" "I was thinking about that day in the street when my horse spooked and you ran to save that boy. I was thinking about how that one moment changed my entire life. How finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me." "You changed my life too," Flora said softly. "I was so lost when I came to Bentonville, so broken. I thought my life was over, that I would never be happy again. And then you walked into it and showed me what real love looked like." "I just loved you the way you deserved to be loved," Asher said. "The way everyone deserves to be loved, but so few people are." They celebrated their anniversary surrounded by their children and grandchildren, a huge gathering at the ranch house by the creek. There was food and music and laughter, and Flora looked around at all the people who existed because she had taken a chance on love, because Asher had seen past her scar to the person underneath. That evening, as the party wound down and family members began heading home, Asher and Flora walked down to the creek, just the two of them. It was the same spot where they had shared so many important moments over the years, and it felt fitting to come here now. "I have kept my promise, haven't I?" Asher asked, taking Flora's hand. "I told you I would prove to you every day that you were loved, and I have done that." "You have," Flora agreed. "Every single day for 40 years. You told me I was beautiful. You showed me I was valued. You made me believe I was worthy of love. You proved every single person who said I would never be loved again absolutely wrong." "They were always wrong," Asher said. "You were always worthy. You were always beautiful. You were always enough exactly as you were." Flora leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the water flow past, listening to the sounds of their family still laughing and talking up at the house. She thought about the terrified young woman who had stepped off the train in Bentonville in 1882, carrying all her belongings in a single bag and believing her life was essentially over. She thought about that woman's fear and pain and despair. And then she thought about the woman she was now, 62 years old, loved beyond measure, surrounded by family, fulfilled in her work, content in her life. She thought about the 40 years of marriage, of children raised and challenges overcome, of a partnership built on love and respect and unwavering devotion. "Thank you," Flora whispered. "For what?" Asher asked. "For seeing me, for loving me, for proving them wrong every single day." Asher kissed the top of her head, then tilted her face up so he could kiss her properly. "Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life, Flora Garrett, and I will keep proving them wrong for as long as I am alive." And he did. They had several more good years together. Years filled with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with quiet mornings and peaceful evenings, with the deep contentment that comes from a life well lived and a love well earned. Asher told Flora she was beautiful every morning until the very last morning they had together, when he passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, holding her hand. Flora grieved him deeply, as anyone would grieve the loss of their soulmate, their partner, their truest love. But even in her grief, she was grateful. Grateful for every day they had together, every moment of love, every time he had proven to her that she was worthy and valuable and cherished. She lived several more years after Asher's death, surrounded by family who loved her, still teaching occasionally, still telling the story of how a cowboy with blue eyes had seen past her scar and loved her so completely that he changed her entire world. She told her grandchildren and great-grandchildren about how important it was to look past appearances, to value character over beauty, to love people for who they truly were. And when Flora herself passed away peacefully at the age of 89, her children and grandchildren gathered to remember her life. They talked about her bravery, her kindness, her intelligence, her strength. They talked about how she had taught them all what real love looked like, because they had witnessed it every day in the way their grandfather had loved their grandmother. They buried her next to Asher on the hill overlooking the creek, where the house they built together still stood, now occupied by James and his family. And on her headstone, along with her name and dates, they carved a simple phrase that captured the truth of her life: loved completely, exactly as she was, because that was the truth. Flora Thompson Garrett had been told by so many people that she would never be loved again after her accident, that no man would want her, that she should resign herself to a lonely life. But Asher Garrett had proven them wrong, not just once but every single day for 40 years, showing Flora and everyone who knew them that real love sees past superficial scars to the beauty within. Their story became legend in Bentonville, passed down through generations as an example of what true love looks like. The house by the creek remained in the Garrett family, and every couple who lived there was told the story of Asher and Flora, of how love given freely and faithfully can heal even the deepest wounds. And somewhere beyond the sunset, beyond the creek that still bubbled over smooth stones, beyond the cottonwood trees that still provided shade, Asher and Flora were together again, his hand in hers, his voice telling her she was beautiful, his love surrounding her just as it always had. Because some loves are too strong to be contained by a single lifetime, too deep to be measured by years, too true to ever really end, they told her she would never be loved again. But the cowboy with the blue eyes and the steady hands and the faithful heart proved them wrong every single day, from the moment he first saw her until his very last breath, and even beyond.